Hi everyone, I've just brought another video for you guys, so let's get started without further ado. Also, remember to like and comment. Tell me which manhwa you'd like me to cover next. Let's do this.
The world had ended, but forgotten papers still carried promises of survival. Relics from a time when humanity still had hope, now trampled in the dust and rubble. Among the wreckage, the proof of the collapse was clear. Something new and terrible now walked upon the ruins of the old civilization, leaving its mark on the ground. And amidst this desolation, a solitary figure crossed the dead city, a world where order had completely collapsed, leaving only chaos behind. He continued on his way, stepping over the remains of a world that no longer existed. Humanity built skyscrapers that touched the sky, but in the end, everything came crashing down. From atop the rubble, the scale of destruction was absolute, a cemetery of concrete and steel. The young man questioned an elder about the past. He wanted to know why all of humanity's advanced technology had simply disappeared after the catastrophe. The old man replied with the harsh truth. The technology didn't disappear. It just became concentrated in the hands of a few powerful people who kept it for themselves. The conversation then turned to the enormous walls that divided the survivors. The young man, with some innocence, asked why they didn't just tear down the barrier, but the elder explained that it was impossible. That wall was more than just protection. It was a class barrier that the powerful would never allow to be destroyed. Suddenly, the scene changed. A group of heavily armed soldiers appeared, interrupting the routine of the place. They were on a clear mission, looking for a man named Yonazio Renjiaosu, and they didn't seem to be there to make friends. Meanwhile, someone watched the group and commented on the mercenaries' lack of combat experience, a dangerous criticism considering the world they lived in. Later, in the darkness of the forest, an invisible danger began to manifest. Something was watching them from among the trees, waiting for the right moment to attack. The young man felt a chill down his spine. A cold sweat ran down his face as his instincts screamed that something terrible was about to happen. And then, a sinister energy began to emerge from the ground. A mental notification warned of a breath of death detected, confirming that the predator had finally arrived. The source of that sinister energy finally revealed itself, a demonic presence that emanated pure terror, announcing what was to come, and it wasn't just one. A horde of hungry creatures emerged from the darkness of the forest, advancing wildly and in a coordinated manner. Soon after, a giant spider emerged from the shadows. The system again warned of the presence of the breath of death. And as if that weren't enough, a spectral wolf joined the hunt, also carrying the same deadly aura. The situation was getting out of control. The confrontation was inevitable and brutal. The young man ended up injured, bleeding on the forest floor, exhausted by the completely uneven battle. Completely surrounded and with nowhere to run, the protagonist found himself cornered by the creatures that kept coming. But even on the verge of death, surrender was not an option. A desperate fury took over him, refusing to accept the end. And it was in that moment of pure pressure, when all seemed lost, that something inside him finally unlocked. Elsewhere, a heavy storm was falling over the forest. Someone lamented their bad luck and the hunger they felt. Hidden in the rain, he thought that if he didn't find any prey soon, he and someone named Liu Yuan would starve. The hunter watched his empty trap, feeling the weight of failure and the bad weather that had arrived before any game. He was so desperate that he thought that, at that point, even a simple sparrow would serve to satisfy his hunger. And as if the universe had heard his request in an ironic way, something gigantic began to descend from the skies. The hunter's eyes widened, focused on what was approaching in the midst of the storm. Only it wasn't a sparrow. It was a colossal creature, flying between the lightning bolts, prey much larger and more dangerous than he could imagine. The giant creature fixed its gaze on the hunter. He was now the prey. Without hesitating, the monster dove in a swift attack, cutting through the air at high speed, but the hunter didn't back down. Faced with the threat, he prepared for the confrontation, as hunger was greater than fear. The impact of the creature's landing was brutal, splitting a tree in half and showing its enormous strength. The hunter used his agility to his advantage, dodging under the attack to reposition himself. He steadied himself on the soaked ground, preparing his next action. The creature wouldn't give him a second chance. Then, he launched his trap, a piece of metal that flew towards the target, but the creature was too agile, dodging at the last second and launching a new aerial attack. The hunter could hardly believe the monster's speed. It was much faster than he had anticipated. Instinctively, he raised his defense to block the creature's pounce. The impact was violent. The force of the blow threw him back, but he managed to stay upright, knocking the bird away for a moment. And in that brief moment of advantage, the hunter leaped. It was his only chance to end the fight. With the monster immobilized, the hunter felt immense relief. The all-night wait had finally paid off. With a quick and brutal move, he finished off the creature, securing his reward. The hunt had been dangerous, but successful. Now, he finally had what he needed to trade for food and survive for a few more days. After the hunt, the hunter walked through the rain, satisfied. The reward would finally guarantee food for several days for both him and Liu Yuan. But suddenly, he felt something strange, a sensation he knew very well, and that always came at the worst possible moment. The illness hit him hard, and he fell to his knees. The hunter couldn't believe this was happening again, especially now. The headache became unbearable, an agony that took over his entire body, manifesting as a chaotic energy. He screamed, feeling a pain that wasn't physical. It was the same condition that had haunted him since he escaped the wolves. He knew this wasn't just a simple headache. It was something much deeper, a force he couldn't control. His body was lifted into the air, as if an invisible force was pulling him somewhere else, away from reality. The sensation of falling was dizzying. He was being taken to an unknown place, inside his own mind. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the forest. Looking at his own hand, the hunter tried to understand what was happening. Confusion took over as his consciousness settled into this new and strange environment. Before him stretched an endless path leading into a deep darkness. He wondered if this was some kind of palace. He was alone in that immense and silent place, a space that seemed to exist outside of time and reality. At the end of that hall, a gigantic door caught his attention. A mysterious light emanated from a crack in the center. Moved by an instinct he didn't understand, the hunter approached and pushed open the heavy gates. On the other side, an even grander and more ancient hall was revealed, a place that held secrets he could barely begin to imagine. The place was vast and silent, like a temple forgotten by time. A strange energy hung in the air, filling the environment with an ancient and unknown power. The protagonist entered, his hand firm on the dagger. He didn't know what to expect from this place, but he was ready for anything. In the center of the hall, a single table caught his attention. He wondered what was on it, the only object in the midst of that immense emptiness. Despite the mystery, he didn't hesitate. Each step led him deeper into that place, driven by a curiosity that surpassed fear. And there was the object of his interest. It wasn't a treasure or a weapon, but something he couldn't immediately identify. But as he approached, the same unbearable headache that brought him there returned in full force. The world around him began to distort. Suddenly, the vision of the hall disappeared. The protagonist's consciousness was thrown back into the real world in the middle of a heavy storm. Meanwhile, in the forest, a man hid from the rain, watching something in the distance with a keen eye. his gaze fixed on a macabre scene. Several bodies lay fallen near the river, victims of a recent confrontation. It was then that he saw the young man. The protagonist was standing, soaked by the rain, seeming to have just emerged from an intense battle. The trail of destruction was evident, another victim of the violence that had taken over that place. The young man got up, staggering. He seemed exhausted, but the urgency of the situation forced him to move, trying to escape from there, but the observer had no intention of letting him go. Without hesitation, he launched his weapon, aiming directly at the fleeing protagonist's back. His face twisted into a scream of effort and rage. For him, this wasn't just any hunt, it was personal. However, the protagonist wasn't caught off guard. He felt the attack coming, and his gaze filled with a cold determination. The real fight was just beginning. The protagonist's counterattack was quick and brutal. With a single blow, he knocked down the hunter, who didn't even have time to react. Fallen on the ground, the man couldn't understand the young man's strength. He wondered how he could be defeated so easily while the protagonist simply walked away. But then, the system intervened with a completely unexpected mission. The order was clear. He needed to give his hunt to someone else. The protagonist couldn't believe what he was reading. The system wanted him to help the same man who, seconds ago, tried to attack him from behind. Reluctantly, he looked back towards the hunter who remained fallen in the rain. A decision needed to be made, however absurd it seemed. The man looked completely broken. Hunger, rain, and defeat had driven him to despair, and he began to whimper. Suddenly, a shadow emerged behind the hunter. The protagonist had returned, and his expression was anything but friendly. He held a small sparrow, the only thing he had managed to hunt. In a cold voice, he asked the man if he wanted it. The hunter was completely confused by the offer, but hunger spoke louder. Without hesitation, he confirmed that he would accept. And so, the protagonist handed over the bird, an act of mercy forced by the system, but one that would change everything for that man. For the hunter, that small gesture meant the world. The tears of despair turned into tears of relief and gratitude. At that same moment, a notification appeared to the protagonist, confirming that the mission was complete. He, however, didn't seem satisfied at all. Back in his mental plane, a reward materialized. A scroll slowly descended into the darkness of that mysterious hall. The scroll flew towards the central table, where the old typewriter awaited him, as if it were waiting for him. The paper fit perfectly into the machine. Something was about to be written, a new skill or perhaps a new destiny. The typewriter revealed the nature of the reward, a skill duplication scroll, capable of copying another person's technique, a powerful and dangerous tool. The protagonist reflected on the possibilities. He could copy anyone's skill, but the image of the hunter, even after the conflict, was the first that came to his mind. Amidst the tears, the hunter thanked the young man, calling him a great person. He had no idea of the reluctance and the mission behind that act of kindness. At that moment, the protagonist made his decision. That man's skill would be his. Without any warning, the young man slapped the hunter in the face. The man, who seconds before saw him as a savior, was paralyzed, understanding absolutely nothing. And as quickly as he acted, the protagonist turned and left, leaving the hunter behind, alone in the rain and confusion. The man's confusion turned into pure fury and despair. He screamed to the heavens, cursing the cruelty of that world and the people who lived in it. The storm finally passed, and the first rays of sunlight began to break through the clouds, signaling a new beginning. Far away, the protagonist was already moving through the forest in a very peculiar way, using the environment to his advantage to move forward. With the sun now on his face, he took a brief pause, taking advantage of the end of the rain to reorient himself and plan his next step. Suddenly, something caught his attention. He looked at the horizon, feeling that he was getting closer to somewhere. Ahead of him stood an imposing wall with a massive gate, a bastion of civilization in the middle of that wild world. It was one of the fortresses that housed the survivors, a place that promised safety, but also hid its own dangers. Behind the walls, the reality was different. A simple, almost primitive village where people struggled to survive day after day. The protagonist entered the settlement. His arrival did not go unnoticed, and the villagers' gazes followed him, full of curiosity and distrust. It wasn't long before the protagonist was approached. A group of unfriendly-looking men blocked his path, clearly looking for trouble in a place where outsiders were not welcome. The leader of the gang whispered to his partner, analyzing the newcomer from head to toe. They were deciding what to do with the stranger who dared to enter their territory. But the protagonist was not intimidated for a second. After everything he faced out there, a bunch of village bullies were nothing to scare him. His hand tightened on the handle of the weapon he was carrying, a silent warning that he would not be an easy prey. Deciding that the trouble wasn't worth it, the young man simply kept walking and passed right by them, completely ignoring the provocation. The stranger's attitude irritated one of the men. Being ignored in that way was an insult he was not willing to accept. The bully reached out to grab him by the shoulder and force a reaction, but was interrupted before he even touched the boy. The oldest man in the group grabbed his companion's arm, warning him not to mess with that kid. There was something about him that made him suspicious. Reluctantly, they let him pass. The protagonist continued on his way, feeling their eyes on his back. The leader then justified his decision to the others, saying that the boy seemed to have some mental problem. For him, it wasn't worth picking a fight with a madman. After all, everyone there lived in the shadow of that gigantic wall, a constant reminder of the dangers of the outside world and the fragile security it offered. The young man continued walking through the precarious streets of the village, looking for a specific place. Without ceremony, he threw the creature he had hunted on the counter and asked how much it was worth. He needed resources to survive in there. The reaction on the other side of the counter was one of pure astonishment. The merchant's hand trembled as he saw the prey, realizing that this young man was no ordinary wanderer. The merchant panicked, asking the young man to handle the creature with care. He had never seen such a hunt and treated it as if it were a fragile treasure. With unexpected delicacy, the man picked up the creature to inspect it, emphasizing how precious it was. The protagonist just watched the scene suspiciously. The young man didn't seem at all impressed with all the theatrics. He knew the merchant was just trying to lower the value of his item. The store was full of animal parts and other hunting items, each with its price, but nothing compared to what the protagonist had brought. To start the negotiation, the merchant placed the creature on the scale to determine its exact weight. After weighing it, the man smiled and announced the result: just over 3 caddies. The first step of the assessment was complete. The protagonist approached the abacus, ready to do the math and make sure he wouldn't be cheated on the final value. His fingers moved nimbly over the instrument, showing that he also understood business and wouldn't be fooled. The merchant then made his first offer, calculating the value at 700. He hoped the young man would accept without question, but the protagonist's response was immediate and firm. That value was too low. The merchant's smile disappeared. He adjusted his glasses, realizing that this kid wouldn't be an easy target in the negotiation. The man tried to be firm, saying that everything had a price and that they needed to follow market rules to close the deal. The young man, however, began his counteroffer. He reminded him that winter was coming, which would make hunting scarcer and therefore more valuable. But the shopkeeper seemed unyielding, shaking his head in denial. He wasn't willing to raise the offer. Seeing the impasse, the protagonist took his hunt back and turned to leave, warning that he would look for Lao Li for a second evaluation, leaving the merchant speechless. The tactic of leaving worked. Seeing that he was going to lose the deal, the merchant ran to stop Ren Xiaosu, asking in a friendly way what price he really wanted. The shopkeeper forced his best salesman smile, trying to reopen the negotiation. He knew that Hunt was too valuable to let it slip away for a bargain. Ren Xiaosu, however, showed no hurry. He stood firm, making it clear that the power of negotiation was now entirely on his side. The pressure worked. The merchant began to sweat, realizing that he would have to really give in if he wanted to close that sale. Without further ado, the young man made his final counteroffer, 1,200, a value well above the initial offer, showing that he knew the true value of the item. The proposal left the merchant completely shocked. The value was so high that he could barely process the boy's audacity. In the end, the seller had no choice but to give in. He took the money, counting the bills with a clear pain in his heart. With each bill counted, the man's expression became more desolate. He was handing over an amount he considered absurd. In a last act of desperation, the shopkeeper tried to hold on to the money, begging that it was too high an amount. But the negotiation was already over. Completely defeated, the merchant collapsed on the counter. Meanwhile, Ren Xiaosu counted his payment, indifferent to the seller's drama. With the money in hand, the young man didn't leave. His eyes fixed on another item on the store shelf, showing that his business there wasn't over yet. To wake the merchant from his misery, he flicked him on the head and asked the price of a padded jacket that was stored away. It was a simple piece of clothing, but it would be essential to face the harsh cold of the approaching winter in the region. The shopkeeper replied that the jacket cost 490 and that he wouldn't even profit from the sale. Ren Xiaosu, however, stated that he wasn't cold, indicating that the purchase wasn't for him. His real interest was in something else. On the shelf, there was a box of anti-inflammatories, an item much more crucial than any coat. Despite the injury to his arm, Ren Xiaosu dismissed the medicine. He convinced himself that the wound wouldn't become inflamed in the winter, preferring to save the money he had earned with so much effort. Instead of the medicine, he used the money to buy a padded jacket. It was an expensive item, but he knew it would be more useful to someone else than medicine for himself. With the purchase made, Ren Xiaosu returned to his humble shack on the outskirts of the city. Upon arriving, he entered silently, as if he didn't want to disturb whoever was inside. Inside, his younger brother was waiting for him, focused on his studies. The boy was surprised and happy to see his older brother arrive, interrupting his lessons to greet him. Ren Xiaosu sat down next to him to check his progress. He approved of what he saw, showing that he cared about the boy's education. But the boy didn't just want to study. With eyes full of admiration, he asked when he could finally go hunting with his brother. Ren Xiaosu's answer was serious and direct. He explained that hunting was dangerous and that knowledge was the most important thing. In that world, no one would dare attack a teacher. For Xiaosu, his brother's future wasn't in the jungle, risking his life. The path was through books, a safe future that he himself could never have. Changing the subject to break the tension, Ren Xiaosu got up, ready to prepare dinner. He handed a piece of bread to his younger brother, making sure the boy wouldn't go hungry while waiting for the food. The younger brother must have noticed the injury, as Xiaosu reassured him, saying they were just unimportant scratches. For the meal, he prepared a soup with the giblets he managed to save from the hunt. It wasn't much, but it was enough to warm them up. When serving, Ren Xiaosu took all the pieces of meat from the pot and placed them on his brother's plate, leaving only the broth for himself. Ren Xiaosu handed the bowl to his brother, filled with all the meat he could get. A simple gesture, but it meant everything in the world they lived in. Seeing that his older brother would only have the broth, the boy couldn't hold back his tears. He felt guilty, knowing that Xiaosu's injury was because of him. But Ren Xiaosu scolded him, saying that in that world, crying was useless. Tears wouldn't protect them from those who wanted to harm them. He reminded the boy of the constant danger that surrounded them. The only hope for a better future was for the younger one to study, as his special abilities could get them out of that life. Xiaosu's harsh words weighed on the boy, who understood the responsibility he carried on his shoulders. Without saying anything else, he picked up the chopsticks and began to eat. Hunger and sadness mixed with each bite. Seeing his brother obey, Ren Xiaosu's tone changed. He teased him for being so well-behaved at home, unlike when they were on the street, and encouraged him to eat quickly. The boy listened in silence, feeling the affection behind his older brother's scolding. Despite the difficult life, seeing his brother fed was all that mattered to Xiaosu at that moment. After they finished eating, the pot was empty. It was all they had for today. While resting, Ren Xiaosu thought about the day's events. Something about a palace he had seen caught his attention. He closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts and understand what that meant. But his rest was suddenly interrupted. Something was different. He got up and looked into the darkness, where an imposing silhouette began to form on the horizon. Without hesitation, Ren Xiaosu began to walk towards that mysterious structure, step by step. Ren Xiaosu's determination was clear. He continued advancing towards that mysterious structure that appeared in his mind, not knowing what awaited him inside. With a simple gesture, he felt a force manifest. It was as if he was opening a door to another world, a place that only existed for him. Upon touching the immense door, it yielded to his will, dissolving into shadows and revealing the interior of the palace. Ren Xiaosu entered the silent hall. The place was vast and dark, and in the center, a single object caught his attention. On a table, an old typewriter and a blank sheet awaited him. He approached, feeling that this was a message. The sheet revealed that he had completed a mission by giving his hunt to another person. The reward was a scroll that allowed him to duplicate someone's ability. The young man was confused. The reward was incredible, but the mission seemed to have been completed by accident. He hadn't given the hunt away, he just took it back. Suddenly, the typewriter seemed to communicate with him, suggesting qualities such as honesty, friendship, and kindness. The idea of being a good person in a world where survival was everything? It didn't make the slightest sense to Ren Xiaosu. He rejected the suggestion right away. Being good in that world was a luxury he couldn't afford. No way. His mind then took him to another place, a dark memory. A young woman walked alone through the darkness of a village. From inside one of the huts, someone watched her steps, waiting for the right moment to act. The woman entered, unaware that she was walking straight into a trap. Behind her, a familiar figure emerged. It was a young Ren Xiaosu, in a memory of harder times, forced to do the unthinkable to survive. That was his reality. A world where kindness didn't fill your stomach and hesitation could cost you your life. Being good was never an option. The memory took him back to that moment. The young Ren Xiaosu approached the woman, but not to attack. He reached out as if to warn her of the danger lurking in the shadows. He wasn't the threat. With a quick gesture, Ren Xiaosu put away his knife, signaling that the real danger had already been neutralized. The woman, Xiao Yu, looked at him, surprised and relieved. The boy then turned to the defeated aggressor and warned him never to bother Xiao Yu again. He said that her life was already difficult enough and that he wouldn't allow anyone to hurt her. Worried, Xiao Yu noticed that he was injured, but the memory also brought back the malicious whispers of others who judged her and accused her of taking advantage of the boy's kindness. Ren Xiaosu walked past her, revealing the aggressor's body on the ground. To cover up what he did, he made up an excuse, saying that a sparrow had attacked him, a lie to protect them both. Xiaoyu then shared her harsh life philosophy. She explained that to survive in that world, one couldn't be decent. Life forced them to do things they didn't want to. It was a bitter truth she carried, a lesson learned the worst way possible. Decency was a luxury they simply couldn't afford, and so the attacker's body was covered, a dark secret shared between the two. Young Ren Xiaosu already understood that survival required sacrifices. Xiaoyu watched him with a mix of sadness and gratitude. She knew what he had done for her, the burden he had taken on to protect her. The memory faded, bringing Ren Xiaosu back to the present. The lessons of that day still echoed in his mind, shaping the man he became. Suddenly, Xiaoyu's own voice pulled him from his thoughts. She lightly scolded him, saying she considered him like a younger brother, showing the strong bond they still maintained. Despite the scolding, her flushed face revealed the genuine affection she felt for him, a connection forged amidst many hardships. But Ren Xiaosu's mind was focused on something else. He reflected on what happened in his mental palace, realizing that perhaps he now possessed some kind of special ability as well. He wasn't sure what it was or how it worked yet, but one thing was clear. He needed to test this new power as quickly as possible. As he watched Xiaoyu leave, Ren Xiaosu was left alone with the weight of his memories and the uncertainty of his future. A new ability could be the key to changing his destiny. After Xiaoyu left, Ren Xiaosu was alone in the darkness, immersed in thoughts about his future and the newfound ability that could change everything. His moment of reflection, however, was interrupted. A familiar voice woke him, telling him to get up. A noise coming from the thatched roof caught his attention, revealing that he was not alone in the shack. Immediately, the young man went on alert, ready to defend himself from whatever was hiding in the shadows. His eyes fixed on the darkness. He didn't know what to expect, but he was prepared for the worst. And then, a figure emerged. It was his older brother, who began to talk about how maybe their mother had gotten food from some wild man. The brother had a look hardened by life, an expression of someone who had seen it all in this chaotic world and needed to do what was necessary to survive. He watched Ren Xiaosu's reaction, assessing whether the younger one was understanding the harsh lesson being taught. With agility, the older one jumped from his place, landing softly on the ground. He approached Ren Xiaosu, who only confirmed that he had understood the order he had just received. The brother then sat down next to him, indicating that the conversation was not over yet. Together, the two looked at the night sky. It was a rare moment of calm, where the older one seemed to organize his thoughts before continuing. It was then that the brother touched on a crucial point, mentioning that perhaps Ren Xiaosu also had some kind of ability, which surprised the young man. The older one looked at the horizon, perhaps remembering his own struggles and the difficult path they both would have to walk to survive. The night passed, and with it, the brothers' words echoed in Ren Xiaosu's mind. The next day would bring new challenges and perhaps answers. Life for the two brothers had always been a struggle for survival. From a very young age, they learned to move through the shadows of the forest, watching and waiting, always looking out for each other. While the younger one rested, the older brother remained on high alert. Protecting his family was a responsibility he carried on his shoulders, even in the darkest and quietest moments. Back in the present, Ren Xiaosu broke the silence of the night and pointed to the sky. There was something he wanted his brother to see, a rare spectacle amidst the chaos of that world. A meteor shower cut through the darkness. It was a moment of beauty and hope, two things they rarely had the chance to witness. Inspired by the moment, the older brother held Ren Xiaosu's hands, reinforcing the importance of learning and staying strong. The young man, even surprised by the intensity, understood the message and agreed. And so, the two brothers spent time together, watching the sky from the door of their shack. It was a silent promise that, no matter what happened, they would face the future side by side. The next day, the routine returned. That rustic place, which served as a kind of school, was one of the few havens of normality that still existed. Inside the makeshift room, the teacher began the lesson, talking about a distant past, the age of civilization with its science and technology. A world that seemed like a legend to those children. The master was a man who carried the weight of lost knowledge. Each of his words was an attempt to keep alive the flame of a world that no longer existed. But for Ren Xiaosu, those stories of the past were not so interesting. Tiredness struck, and he couldn't hide the yawn to the amusement of his colleagues. Outside, however, someone listened with full attention. Ren Xiaosu's older brother peeked through the window, absorbing every word and wondering what this technology thing was. The teacher continued the lesson, listing the pillars of the ancient civilization on the board. Concepts like industry and medicine, which now sounded like magic to the students. Determined not to miss anything, the brother leaned against the stone wall, seeking a better angle. That knowledge was too valuable, even if he couldn't afford to enter the room. Suddenly, the sound of the book closing forcefully echoed through the room. The teacher announced that class was over for the day, dismissing the students to go home to eat. The lesson about the past had ended, but the questions had only just begun. Class was over, but for Ren Xiaosu's brother, who was spying from outside, a new lesson was about to begin. He wasn't just going to listen from afar. Determined, the young man turned to directly approach the owner of that knowledge. As expected, the teacher barred him from entering. He made it clear that the boy was not allowed in the classroom, but the young man showed no frustration. On the contrary, he bowed with a respectful smile, showing that he wasn't there to cause trouble. He had a plan. He had prepared a hot meal, an offering in exchange for the lessons he couldn't afford. The teacher, intrigued by the audacity, decided to try the food. The taste seemed to surprise him, breaking some of his seriousness, and the negotiation didn't stop there. The young man then offered something even more valuable, a cigarette, a small luxury that few could afford. The master looked at the gift and at the boy. The persistence and cleverness of that young man was something he didn't see every day. A match was struck, and the teacher accepted the offer. He took a long drag, relaxing against the stone wall. That moment of calm was a small victory in the boy's strategy. The master was silent, pondering. The young man had no money, but he had initiative and a courage that couldn't be bought. Ren Xiaosu's brother then pointed to the teacher's garden, noting that, because of the master's status, no one dared to steal his vegetables, a subtle but real power. The sharp observation caught the teacher by surprise. The boy wasn't just persistent, he was a natural observer. He coughed, caught off guard by the young man's cunning. The young man's insight had left the teacher speechless, but the boy didn't stop there and took advantage of the moment to ask a question that had intrigued him for a long time. The master listened carefully, the smoke rising as he processed the depth of the question. The boy wasn't interested in trivialities. He questioned the past. If humanity was so advanced before the cataclysm, why had all that disappeared? Where were the wonders of the ancient civilization? The teacher's answer was short and loaded with weight. He explained that it was the fault of a broken generation which did not know how to preserve what it had. Faced with a world in ruins and a fractured society, the master didn't understand. He asked how the young man could still think about learning instead of just surviving. He himself seemed to reflect on his own question. The search for knowledge in such a world seemed, in fact, a lost cause. But then, the teacher revealed the truth. Knowledge didn't disappear. It was simply locked away, now in the hands of a few powerful people who live inside those walls. The revelation hit the young man hard. The injustice of the situation was clear in his eyes. Knowledge was not a lost treasure, but a stolen privilege. His logic was simple and direct. If the walls were the barrier that prevented everyone from accessing a better life, then why not simply tear them down? He argued that there is strength in unity. Most beasts would not dare to attack a large group of people. The walls, for him, were a prison disguised as protection. The teacher took a long drag, absorbing the boy's radical idea. The audacity and simplicity of the plan seemed to amuse him, but he knew that reality was much more complex. The master then explained why. Those with power and privileges inside the fortress would never allow the walls to fall. Cheap labor from outside was too useful to them. The wall was not just a physical defense. It was a social barrier that guaranteed the superiority of one class over another, keeping those outside in a cycle of dependence. With the conversation reaching a crucial point, the teacher put out the cigarette. That day's lesson wasn't about books, but about the harsh workings of the world they lived in. The teacher, having finished the lesson, began to walk away, but the young man wasn't satisfied and followed him, insisting that he still had much to learn. The master commented that a certain smell in the air was not good for the students. With sarcasm, the young man questioned whether, since he wasn't a student, it would be okay for him to smell that smell. The sharp response caught the teacher by surprise. He didn't expect that logic and was visibly embarrassed by the boy's audacity. Suddenly, a familiar sound caught the young man's attention, and he turned in the direction the noise was coming from. It was the school bell. The teacher entered the classroom where the other students were already waiting for him to begin the afternoon lesson. But Ren Xiaosu's brother didn't leave. He stood at the door, a stranger observing a world to which he didn't belong, making the other students uncomfortable. The teacher ignored the presence at the door and started the lesson. The topic of the day would be survival in the desert. He explained to the students that, as they grew up, they would need to learn to protect themselves. His words, however, seemed directed straight at the boy watching from the entrance. To illustrate his point, the master proposed a hypothetical scenario to the students. He asked what they would do if they happened to encounter a pack of wolves in the wild. Before any of the students could answer, a hand went up at the door. The young outsider had the answer and seemed quite confident about it. He pondered for a moment, organizing his thoughts to give the answer that, to him, was the most obvious and practical in the world. The teacher, intrigued, nodded, allowing the boy to answer. He was genuinely curious to see what kind of wisdom this young man possessed, but the answer that came next was nothing like what he expected. The master's face changed from curiosity to pure shock and horror. The whole room fell silent. The young man's logic was so brutal and unexpected that it left the teacher completely speechless, rethinking the very concept of survival. With a confident gesture, the young man ended his explanation. His brutal logic about survival was so direct that it left the teacher and the whole room completely speechless. Visibly shaken, the master tried to compose himself, coughing to disguise his shock. He then questioned the boy, wanting to know who this Mr. Zhang was who supposedly let him in. The protagonist remained silent, just watching the teacher's reaction. The situation was delicate, and he knew that any wrong word could ruin everything. In his mind, the law of the jungle was clear. No matter the enemy, the result would always be the same. Meanwhile, the teacher wondered if this boy was being groomed to be his successor. The master stared at him for a long moment, pondering the implications. This young man was unlike any student he had ever had, with a worldview forged in the harshest reality. Caught by surprise, the young man couldn't hide his gratitude. This was the chance he had been waiting for, and he thanked the master with genuine relief on his face. And then, something unexpected happened. A system notification appeared before his eyes, signaling that his life was about to change in a way he couldn't imagine. At that moment, a memory surfaced. He remembered the words of his brother, who always gave him the best things and encouraged him to study to become a good man. Back in reality, he felt a new determination. The system wasn't just a blue screen, it was a promise of power. The notification said that he had acquired a unique skill, something that could change his destiny forever. He analyzed the details. His strength, which was previously 2.5, had received a bonus. He began to calculate what that meant in practical terms for his survival. His eyes widened at the conclusion. A confident smile appeared on his face. With this new power, his strength now surpassed that of an average adult. His chances of surviving in that hostile world had just increased dramatically. Suddenly, a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. It was his younger brother, Liu Yuan, who had appeared there, calling for him. The older brother's proposal took Liu Yuan by surprise. He would not only have classes, but could also become a substitute teacher. Faced with that offer, Liu Yuan was speechless, just staring at his older brother in that desolate village. With a sly smile, the young man explained that the teacher liked cigarettes, which made things easier. He continued, saying that being a teacher wasn't a bad idea and that when the time came, he would pass the position on to Liu Yuan. It was a plan for the boy's future. And with that, the older brother turned and started walking, as if the matter was closed and Liu Yuan's future decided. Liu Yuan then expressed his gratitude, saying that his brother always gave him the best things. But the older young man refused the idea for himself, stating that being a teacher was Liu Yuan's path, not his. The boy's answer made the older brother stop and look back, a little surprised by his reaction. With no time for further discussion, he hurried Liu Yuan along. The boy obeyed and ran to catch up with him. The two brothers continued on their way together, side by side, leaving the conversation behind for a moment. The tranquility of the village, however, was about to be shattered. Suddenly, the sound of heavy, organized footsteps echoed through the dirt streets. Someone was coming. It wasn't just one person. A squad of heavily armed mercenaries marched towards them, interrupting their path. The apparent leader of the group seemed dissatisfied, complaining loudly that he only wanted a few days off and not to be there. They argued among themselves, seeming lost or looking for someone who could guide them or offer some information. The situation became even more tense when a masked and heavily armed figure joined the group, staring at the two brothers. The danger was palpable. While a group of mercenaries patrolled the village, one of them watched a girl in the distance, feeling that she possessed a wild aura like an untamed animal. Nearby, Ren Xiaosu and his younger brother were talking. The older one commented that the boy seemed surprisingly familiar with the dangers of life in the jungle. Xiaosu, however, did not relax. His instincts kept him on constant alert, sensing that something was wrong in the air. Night fell on the settlement. The lit bonfires gave a false sense of peace, but the tranquility was about to end. Suddenly, Ren Xiaosu rushed into the hut where they were sheltered, making a noise that startled his brother. The boy noticed a recent wound on Xiaosu's arm, and with a worried voice, asked if he was okay. Xiaosu turned around, trying to reassure him. He asked his brother not to pretend he wasn't worried and promised he wouldn't risk his life for nothing. But his expression changed when he looked outside. The silence was broken by a sound he knew well, the sound of approaching footsteps. It was the mercenaries, and they weren't alone. A local was guiding them, answering the squad leader's questions. The noise grew louder, confirming Xiaosu's suspicions. They were coming straight for their cabin. In a swift movement, he pushed his brother to the ground, placing himself in a defensive position. There was no time for explanations. Carefully, Ren Xiaosu peeked through a crack in the wall, trying to assess the approaching threat. Outside, the guide was trying to calm the mercenary leader, saying there was no reason to worry and that it was all a misunderstanding. Only it was a trap. The man turned to the trap closed. Caught by surprise, the two young men immediately stood guard. Now, there was no other option but to fight. Protecting his brother, the protagonist faced the imminent threat. The trap was set, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Then, defiantly, the young man revealed himself at the entrance of the tent, ready to confront whoever was outside. Instead of attacking the mercenaries, he went straight for the guide and grabbed his wrist with a mocking smile, surprising everyone. The action was so unexpected that it left the entire group completely confused. No one understood what the boy was trying to do. One of the mercenaries turned to the guide, annoyed by the confusion and demanding to know what was happening. His patience ran out quickly. The man started yelling, fed up with the charade and the waste of time. The situation escalated, and the mercenary grabbed the guide by the collar, physically threatening him while the protagonist just watched. Desperate, the guide tried to explain himself, saying that Ren Xiaosu had a mental problem and that it was all a big misunderstanding. But while the old man panicked, the protagonist whistled calmly, acting as if none of this was his problem. The group leader gave Wang Fugi an ultimatum. He had until dawn to find a suitable candidate, or their plans would be ruined. Only the whole mess didn't go unnoticed. From the shadows, a mysterious figure watched the scene from atop a roof. His gaze was intense and focused. A new player had entered the field, and no one knew what his intentions were. The figure's attention then turned directly to the protagonist, who seemed to have piqued his interest. The young man felt the gaze on him. His expression changed, realizing that there were more people involved that night than he imagined. And at that exact moment, a notification popped up in front of him. A new mission or ability had been unlocked. The game was about to change. The protagonist was speechless. The notification that appeared out of nowhere was something he had never seen before. The system offered a bizarre choice: randomly copy the target's firearm skill. He just had to accept to learn. Without hesitation, he accepted. A flood of information about weapons, maintenance, and tactical knowledge began to pour into his mind. He then realized what that meant. The ability to copy other people's skills was a complete game changer. All the knowledge was absorbed in seconds, as if he had spent his entire life training with firearms. The learning was a success. In an instant, he mastered advanced proficiency, a level that would take anyone years to reach. It finally clicked. The power he had just acquired was almost unbelievable, and the reality of his new ability shocked him. He explored the interface and understood that there were different levels of copying. The possibility of learning other people's superpowers made him wonder if that wouldn't make him invincible. But the system revealed something even more shocking. That girl's skill wasn't just advanced, it was perfect. A level of mastery he didn't even know existed. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by an insistent call, which pulled him out of his concentration. It was the voice of his younger brother, who called him repeatedly, trying to get his attention. The boy tugged at his cloak, asking why he was staring so intensely at that woman's back. The woman, perhaps sensing that she was being watched, seemed to prepare to turn and face them. The distance between them was great, but the tension in the air was palpable. The two brothers on one side and the mysterious woman on the other. When she turned around, the protagonist questioned her about what she was doing there, while his brother recognized her right away. It was Sister Xiaoyu. With a smile, the woman introduced herself as the new neighbor. She explained that she had moved into the house where a family used to live, and that she would be living there now. The introduction was abruptly interrupted by Liu Yuan, who whispered an indiscreet question to his older brother, wanting to know if he was still a virgin. The reaction was immediate. Annoyed by the youngster's audacity, the protagonist said that since Liu Yuan was no longer a child, he would educate him on certain matters himself. Despite the confusion, he said goodbye to Xiaoyu with a forced smile, trying to keep up appearances as he dragged his brother inside. Once inside, the lecture continued. He warned Liu Yuan not to provoke Sister Xiaoyu and, above all, not to try to play Cupid between them. It was then that, in the middle of the scolding, something in the corner of the room caught his attention. Liu Yuan found 2 potatoes and a bottle with 3 pills hidden under a chair, completely changing the focus of the conversation. The boy pointed to the hiding place, completely surprised by the discovery. He soon asked if those medicines were for the wound on his brother's hand. The protagonist picked up the bottle, and a suspicion began to form in his mind. This didn't seem like a simple coincidence. An old memory surfaced, connecting the present with an event from the past. He remembered that the last time someone helped him anonymously, the medicine was left in the exact same place. He had been looking for this person ever since. Liu Yuan then made the final connection. He revealed that the only person he had told about his brother's injury was Xiao Yu herself. The silence that followed was heavy. The identity of the mysterious benefactor finally seemed clear. Without wasting time, he went to Xiao Yu's house and grabbed her arm, confronting her. Caught by surprise, she only said that she no longer provided that kind of service. He questioned her about the medicine, but Xiao Yu tried to dismiss him. She said that she could no longer help him and that he should forget about it, leaving the young man completely confused by her answer. Suddenly, a noise caught his attention. The protagonist's instinct spoke louder, and his hand went straight to the hilt of the dagger. Out of nowhere, a burly man appeared and grabbed Xiao Yu violently, tearing her clothes without any hesitation. The protagonist didn't think twice. A mission notification appeared in his vision, but that didn't matter at all. He decided that he would help anyway, with or without the system's order. His determination was absolute. In the blink of an eye, he lunged at the aggressor. The man was caught off guard by the sudden intervention, but the initial shock soon turned into a mocking smile. He didn't take the young man's threat seriously. The brute then displayed his own weapon, a heavy metal blade, mocking the protagonist's small bone dagger. The confrontation was brutal and quick. The young man's weapon shattered on the first impact against the steel. Only the aggressor's smile disappeared. His blade had been stopped inches from his neck. The protagonist was disarmed, with only the broken hilt in his hands. But he didn't back down. Taking advantage of the opening, he dropped the broken dagger and grabbed the enemy's arm with his bare hands. With impressive strength, he locked the man's wrist, preventing the blade from advancing. The fight was far from over. Using the aggressor's strength against himself, the protagonist reversed the situation with a quick movement, throwing the man with everything into the mud puddle. The foreman lay on the ground, stunned. He couldn't believe the absurd strength of that young man who seemed so fragile. Seeing the scene, the woman the protagonist was defending was in shock and asked who that man who attacked her was. She explained with a trembling voice that he was a foreman from the local coal mine, and that wasn't all. The woman revealed that he and his group had murdered a man in the city the night before, just to steal the money the victim kept. Upon hearing that, the protagonist's expression changed completely. The fight, which was previously to defend himself, now had a new purpose. He then saw a knife lying on the ground and picked it up without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, the young man was already on top of the foreman, with the blade pressed against his neck. The game had completely changed, but at that exact moment, a mission notification appeared in front of him, as always happened at the worst times. The protagonist ignored the system. He didn't need a mission to do what was right and delivered a precise blow to the aggressor. The man screamed in pain, clutching the wound that bled non-stop. The fight was over. However, instead of finishing him off, the protagonist gave him a chance. He said that if the foreman ran to the town clinic, he might survive. With the warning given, he told the man to get up and disappear from there. The foreman fled desperately through the dark village while the protagonist watched in silence with the woman and child by his side. Only then did he turn to the system notification, questioning the logic behind those judgments. To him, it made no sense. The boy, however, didn't seem convinced. With surprising coldness, he commented that the town clinic was so bad that it probably wouldn't even know how to stitch the man's wound. The protagonist smiled, pleased with the response. He said that seeing the boy being so ruthless made him calmer, as it was a sign that he would know how to survive in that world. With the conversation over, he bent down and picked up the knife he had left on the ground. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the weapon and his own recent actions. Meanwhile, the woman watched the scene from afar with an expression of clear concern on her face. She seemed to be processing everything that had just happened, the violence and the protagonist's decision. The exchange of glances between them was silent, but full of meaning and unanswered questions. The protagonist then began to walk away, casually explaining that certain substances weren't that addictive, as the amount of a certain ingredient was minimal. He sheathed the knife, the metallic sound echoing in the night. With his back to them, he seemed to have taken on a new role, a new posture in the face of life. But all that tough guy pose went down the drain in the next instant. Something the girl said completely panicked him. The young woman herself was embarrassed, caught off guard by his exaggerated reaction. She then uttered the phrase that caused it all. She said that she had always seen him only as a younger brother. The protagonist tried to laugh to hide his embarrassment, commenting on how strange the situation had suddenly become. And, in an act of desperation, he grabbed the little boy and started shaking him, blaming the boy for always filling his head with those ideas. The young woman couldn't contain her laughter. The protagonist's desperate attempt to blame the little boy for the embarrassing situation only made it even more amusing for her. But suddenly, the boy's mind was transported to another place. A dark and empty space manifested, completely breaking the mood from before. From the middle of the darkness, an old typewriter began to form, its keys moving on their own with a dry, metallic sound. A sheet of paper materialized, revealing a new message from the system. A side quest had been activated. The embarrassment of seconds ago disappeared, giving way to a subtle smile. A side quest. Now that was interesting, but he still had no idea where this new task would lead him.